remember her. Yeah.
All righty. Good evening, everybody.
Well, it's nice to see you again.
Good evening. All right. Welcome. You guys hear me? I can talk louder than I do anyway. Good evening. My name is David Hearns. I'm the executive director of Blount Mansion. And I just want to say, just like Jenny did, I just want to thank you all for coming. You know, this is a good turnout, and we're always glad for folks to be able to come and spend some time with us. So, do a very brief introduction, not introduction, what's the word I'm looking for, sort of explanation on how we ended up with the guidebook that we ended up with, and also the introductory video. And Michael will touch on everything, so I won't go into too much detail. But when I started in 2014, a lot of the materials that we had were for guests and for visitors and everything were dated and just didn't quite tell the story the way that we wanted to, and especially the way that the story's evolved since I've been here. When Michael started in 2018, I believe, 2018, one of the things that we had talked about were the two things that were sorely lacking were a guidebook, which we had people asking about all the time, and a replacement for the video that we had. In a little while, you'll see a little bit of it, and I think it'll be pretty self-explanatory why. I heard that video at least 6,000 times. I can recite most of it in my sleep, and I'm just really, really glad that we don't have to use it anymore. And so those were the two things that Michael and I really thought, you know, would really increase the visitor's experience, and improve the visitor experience here. And so that was always on our to-do list. It took us a little while to get it done, but we got there. So, Michael, like I said, started here in 2018. Was here between 2018 and 2022.
August of 2022.
22.
Exactly 4 years.
Yeah. So, you know, he and I had a fantastic working relationship. We both have our own niche things that we're very good at, and so he and I got along like peas in a pod. So, you were born and raised in North Carolina.
Yes.
Kings Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Kings Mountain, North Carolina. Went to Carson Newman?
Yes.
Went to Carson Newman.
Yes,
But also was a international traveler as far as doing news broadcasts and all kinds of stuff, writing books, living in Savannah, lots of different things that I'm sure he'll touch on a little better than I can. But either way, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Gould.
Thank you so much for being here. Everybody here I know, and each of you is important to me for different reasons, and I thought about doing shout-outs, but we would probably spend the entire time with me telling each of you what the rest of you mean to me. So there are people here obviously from the Blount Mansion family that really became a family to me over the 4 years that I spent here, and I still feel that way. There are folks from my Rotary Club, which is definitely a family to me. There are folks from my new job at UT, who have become family to me. They're not actual family here, too. Unfortunately, my wife and son couldn't be here because he has a middle school basketball game, and one of us needed to be there. Apparently, they don't. If you leave them there, it's bad. So, my wife and son are not here, but her mom is here, Margaret, so thank you for coming. And also my dad's college roommate and his wife, who are my aunt and uncle, Sonny and Carol. So I'll give you all a shout out since you're actual family. And then I have just friends too from Knoxville. So I appreciate you taking the time because I know how busy it is, I know how dark it is, and I know how cold it is. And I don't want to leave my house after 4:30. So when I moved to Knoxville, as Dave alluded to, I came from Savannah, Georgia, which is a town that really wears its history on its sleeve. And I had spent time as a journalist there, and then worked in a history museum group where I got to be the PR guy for a Civil War fort, a railroad museum, a Revolutionary War battlefield, and the city's history museum. So it was like an incubator for me. And I had fun on the side, being a military reporter and covering troops. So I had all these things going on, and I didn't want to leave. My wife got this amazing job at the Baker Center, which is now the Baker School at UT. And we got here, and she wound up doing 6 months overseas as a Fulbright, so we were gone. As soon as we got here, we did a semester at sea, and she was a professor. So it took me a good 3 or 4 years to find my feet in Knoxville, and I was still making video documentaries and doing things in Savannah. But it was when I found this opportunity at Blount Mansion that Knoxville really kind of became full color to me, when it became a vibrant place. And I discovered that when you find your tribe, You can fit in anywhere. And this was my tribe. And what I love about the history community here in Knoxville, and Paul James of the History Project can attest to this, there's a bunch of museums here, in some cases with 1 or 2 employees and a small army of volunteers, and they all work together as a team. And in Savannah, they kind of compete with each other. And in places like Savannah and Charleston, history is really for tourists. But here in Knoxville, it's for the locals as much as anybody. So we're part of something wonderful. And in Jefferson City, too, with the Glenmore Mansion. So I hope if you take nothing else away from tonight, it will be a greater appreciation for local history and for, how much you matter to it. Because especially in a town like Knoxville where we have small museums, every volunteer counts, every docent really matters. Every donation really makes a difference, and it's is it Giving Tuesday? Is that what they call it?
Sure is.
Yeah. So the money that you paid to be here tonight supports Blount Mansion too. So we really appreciate it. So because I don't know what everybody knows about Blount Mansion, I'll give you a really, really quick what is Blount Mansion, and then the video will tell you more. Oh, look, it's a beautiful picture of the mansion, shot from the parking garage. So you don't even need a drone, right? Blount Mansion is the oldest museum in Knoxville. It was started circa 1925 to 1929 by a lady named Mary Boyce Temple, who is the regent of a Daughters of the American Revolution chapter. And it was about to be turned into a parking lot, and she put a stop to that by writing the first $100 check. It is also the only garden in downtown Knoxville that the public can visit. You could say Crutch Park, I'm never quite sure. Crouch Park, it's kind of a garden, but this is actually a garden. And you don't even have to buy a ticket. If the museum is open, I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't have said that, sorry. If the museum is open, you can come have your lunch here. You can do yoga in the yard. You can do whatever you want. And it's really a special place that you can kind of, in the middle of this concrete canyon, take a break.
We encourage people to come. They don't have to have a ticket to use the garden.
Yeah, nobody will bother you. You might say hello, but that's it. But the reason Blount Mansion matters historically is this guy. If I step over here, can y'all hear me so I'm not blocking the picture? William Blount did a lot of things, some good, some skeevy, all important. He signed the U.S. Constitution for North Carolina. There's his signature. And he was, not too long afterwards, given the opportunity to govern the Southwest Territory, which was a federal territory created from the western half of North Carolina. And he shepherded it into statehood as the state of Tennessee. So William Blount was never the governor of Tennessee. He was the governor of the Southwest Territory. He created the city of Knoxville as a territorial capital. So Knoxville is older than Tennessee. And then when Tennessee became a state, he became the first, one of two, the first U.S. senators. So that's his connection. But the way he created the state was unique. They basically got together, created a state government, wrote the documents, did a constitution, and told the feds, hey, we're your new state. And Congress was like, whoa, we're not sure this is how it should work. And it really mattered because it was a presidential election year, Jefferson versus Adams. And the Adams folks did not want Tennessee in the Union because it would bring votes to Jefferson. And so it was complicated, but they finally let them in as the 16th state. And while this is not William Blount's desk, you can see the statehood desk that first state constitution was signed on in the governor's office, which is here at Blount Mansion. And it's really cool. And it was restored for the Tennessee 225th, which is another great story. Dave, if he's with you, will open the drawers and show you how they had to fabricate parts to replace things and age wood and age brass to make it look original. But it's a really cool, important piece of furniture. So like Dave said, I was here for 4 years. And summer of August 22, I was given 2 chances of a lifetime. One was an opportunity to shoot underwater archaeology video in Saudi Arabia for a year. And the other was to go be the fundraiser at the public radio station at UT. And I was just waiting to see which one was going to happen, right? Saudi Arabia didn't happen, and for my friends who do have that job, I'm glad it didn't from what I've learned. But the UT thing did, and I felt awful because I love Blount Mansion, and I knew that we had so much more that I hadn't been able to finish. And so I reached out to Dave, and I broke the news, and I said, I'm so sorry that I have to leave. You can have me for 2 weeks doing whatever you want, or if you leave me alone for a month and keep me on the payroll, I will write the guidebook, and I will make the orientation film. And he said, deal. So that's what I did. And the guidebook is, as far as we know, the 3rd guidebook at Blount Mansion. The first one was this booklet that Mary Boyce Temple, the daughter of the American Revolution who really made everything happen, put together circa 1929. And this is a wonderful time capsule because it tells you the story of William Blount the way they saw it. And you know, it's no surprise that people view history differently, and the way we view history over time changes, right? In 1929, this was the William Blount Shrine. And if you read the language, it talks about, you know, this great founding father coming here and settling the wilderness and taming the savages, and it's just full of ways that we don't think about history now. Not untruths, but just seeing it through a different lens. But you can also see all that they had to do to turn this tenement back into, you know, a conjectural restoration of a circa 1800 house. And we can talk in a minute about how the house, you know, didn't look like this when William Blount was here. It was, but you don't want to tear things down to bring it back to where he was. So they had a lot of work to do. But you can see that the governor's office was a separate residence at that point. But if you've been in the mansion, you can see that the finishes on the walls are different. And then here's the group, the DAR ladies that made this all happen, and some of Blount's descendants rededicating his grave at the Presbyterian Church. So that's the first one. And then it's another 47 years before we get another one. This is the man and his mansion. I really like this one. This has been out of print for quite a while. There's a couple of copies left. And you can see they've changed the inside of the mansion. And the story's a little bit different too. You start to talk about Native Americans and giving them their own voice. A little bit of mention of women and children. Not a great deal, but some. And you'll hear, if you read this book, and I can share it with you if you want to have a PDF of it, you'll hear the language that's in their first ever video that they had too. And they've got the governor's office here. And I love this, I use this as a pull quote at the end of the new book. Blount Mansion has lived from the end of the 18th century straight on into the 20th. During its lifetime, the city has grown up around it. The small Blount College, Blount helped to found what is now the University of Tennessee in 1794, has become the University of Tennessee. The state, which had its formal beginnings on the premises, has grown and developed in ways the founders could have never dreamed of. The glass eyes, and it's legend. We don't have a historical document to prove that it's true, but the story has always been, since the founding of the museum, that the Cherokee Indians referred to the windows in Blount Mansion as eyes, and this was the house with many eyes, because all the buildings around here were log cabins up to that point. So the glass eyes, which so amazed the Indians, which first saw the great trees, wagon roads, and log houses, now look up to tall buildings and city traffic. But the sun still streams through the windows as it must have when the house was new. Birds still sing in the garden, and there's an aura of quiet around the house that must be an 18th century quiet. And somehow the spirit of hospitality that the Blounts brought to their home still remains to welcome each guest and keep the past alive. I hear music when I read that. It's very 1970s, but I like it. So in order to update the story, I had the benefit of listening to Dave tell the story many, many times. And when the pandemic started, we thought, we've got to get a video now to help the docents train. So Dave did his full, completely all stops, no holds barred, hour and a half long, I think. Maybe it was 3 hours? 3-hour tour. He told everything about every room and every part of the house. And we filmed it all and put it on YouTube. And then everybody went home to have the pandemic and watched that video and practiced their tours for when we would come back. So I had that to work with. And I had a couple of journal articles. One from the 1940s by Stanley Foamsby and Susan Dillon. And then another one by Ken Whitworth, who is a director here. Blount Mansion Parking Lot or Landmark. And Dean Novelli, one of our spirited volunteers, dug these up for me, and they really helped me out a lot. So there's material out there. But this is, we're talking now 2020, 2021, had no time to work on this book. Finally, I start my job at UT, I've given my notice, and it's time to write. I was thinking, how am I going to cram this into my summer between our summer travels and ending Blount Mansion and getting to UT? How am I going to find the bandwidth? We were in Seoul, Korea, and I caught COVID. And I got quarantined. So this became a writer's retreat, okay? And I thought you would enjoy these messages from the Korean Health Agency. And check out their cool logo. We will find you. So you have to pay $220 for the test. They stick the thing up your nose, and surprise, you've got COVID. I was at the DMZ when I found out. I didn't tell anybody else on the bus. I just came back and we go back to our hotel, and they say, you've got to leave, you've got to get an Airbnb. So this is the Jungpu Public Health Center. Did you move yet to your quarantine? If so, give me the address. And I gave it to him, and it's 23 Jungmin Road, 7 Gil, Jeongju, Seoul, South Korea. I didn't know where that was, right? I'm fevered at this point. And I was like, can I ever leave? You know, and they said, you need to keep quarantine, although nobody monitored. So this is the place. There it is, Jeongju, Room 7 Gil. And it was just a regular neighborhood where I could sit on the roof and write and watch life go by. And this was my room. They had no furniture. Fun fact, most Korean homes don't have top sheets. They have a fitted sheet and a blanket. And they don't have bath towels. They use one hand towel per day. So I had to learn to do that too. But my wife and son, they visited me on the first day of my quarantine and brought me breakfast and left. I felt too sick to sleep, but I could write. And that made me feel better. Okay? And then when I felt better, I would get up at like 6 in the morning and go for a long masked walk, buy food to go at an open air market, come back, go in my room and shut the door. Krista and Joseph would come out and get ready and leave. And I had all day to just write. And nobody would bother me because I was on the other side of the world and it was 12 hours different. So I wrote 40,000 words in 1 week. It took us another 10 months to typeset and lay out the book and do the design, but the guts of it were written. And for the design, we turned to Mick McKay of Savannah. Mick is Joseph, my son's godfather. He's a graphic designer, and he was the project lead on the Coffee Table book, which was my first book. And he did the coffee mug for WUOT's pledge drive this year. And he also created a beautiful hand-drawn engraving of Blount Mansion when William Blount lived here. And to do this, he drew it in, I guess it's AutoCAD or something, and he built a model, and then he made the drawing. And this hangs inside the mansion now in the great room. And it shows us what the house must have looked like based on architectural historian studies and writings and conversations with Dave and all kinds of surveys. So you see you've got the mansion as a Carolina hall and parlor house with no second story. The wings haven't been added yet. Kitchen that still stands attached. Probably a privy, I guess. Did they ever decide? Slave quarters, which have vanished. The governor's office. And the governor's, basically his beer cooler. That's where he keeps his vegetables and his Madeira. And interestingly, you see the doors on the outside here. Dave thinks that it probably should be there. The people who restored the mansion in the 60s decided that it needed to be facing the inside, but this is his business office. If you were going to visit Governor Blount to do business with a territorial governor or do law work, would you go inside his garden to get to the office? No, you'd go through the street. So we think this is what it looked like. So Mick did the work on our book. And we borrowed that phrase, the house with many eyes, just because it's so poetic. And what he's done, and this is the same kind of plan that we followed for a guidebook for the Isaiah Davenport House Museum in Savannah. Color-coded divisions for chapters that make it easy to navigate. And you see the colors, see it's gray on the side there. So you can actually tell what part of the book you're in by looking at the colors. We start out with the story of Blount, his childhood, his political career in North Carolina, getting the governorship. There's kind of sub-chapters inside about the Constitution connection and his signing of the Constitution and the citizenship ceremonies that have been done here at Blount Mansion and the connection between Knoxville and America's Constitution. We talk about the founding by Blount and a handful of others of what would become UT. And his daughter was one of the first students and remarkably was a co-ed decades before they actually officially had co-eds. There was a handful of women who went to Blount College. The Tennessee plan that I told you about, learning about the way that Tennessee gained statehood and what other states have done it. Then we talk about, and remember every house museum has two stories, right? The story of the history that it tells, and then the story of the museum and the efforts to save it and all the things. And in this case, Blount Mansion's association is 98 years old, almost a century. So that's a compelling and interesting story too. So we learned about Mary Boyce Temple and how it was the construction of the Andrew Johnson Hotel, which was kind of a forward-thinking effort to grab the tourists who were going to go to the soon-to-be-created Great Smokies, and how it threatened to make this a parking lot. Mary Boyce Temple saved it, and learn all about the things that happened over the decades to save the mansion. Chapter 3 is about the garden, and you see the beautiful, and you can see this on the wall, actually, I think, in the hallway. The original plan for the garden, Knoxville Garden Club was founded in the 30s, and its first big project was the garden at Blount Mansion, and they still come once a week, volunteer, and attend the garden. And they hired the best minds in garden architecture from Colonial Williamsburg, and this is that original plan. And of course it changed over the years. You know, you had it like a wishing well. As archaeology was done and they uncovered more features, the plan had to change to accommodate that. Chapter 4 is about the other historic house on the property, the circa 1820 Craighead Jackson house, and all of its different phases and all the scandalous things that happened, like the theft of $100,000 worth of silver, where the guys, they took a tour, then they took another tour, right? That's when you have to worry. And they scaled into a second-story window and came down through the ceiling of the room. So they avoided all the burglar alarms. But of course, the big ribbon that's tied on this house is when we cut the ribbon, that UT System President Randy Boyd and his family foundation donated money to restore the Craighead house about 2 years ago. And so now it's useful for events. And if you ever want to have a dinner, a cabinet meeting, a gathering, a wedding reception, or whatever, the Craighead House is a great place to do it. In chapter 5, this is nuts and bolts. We talk about who has owned the mansion. And we start with the Native Americans who owned the land that granted James White and William Blount the ability to have it to make the blocks and grid out downtown Knoxville. And then there's just a whole other host of people, many important, some forgettable, that owned the mansion until present day. And we also take a look at how it's changed, both with a floor plan and with profile drawings, so you can see that the wings are added. And it's crazy how they did it, because the west wing is basically a double wide. They drug an existing house up and tacked it on. So Dave hates it when I say that. It's a 19th century double wide. Clayton Homes and Blood. They should be.
You should ask them to sponsor, yeah.
What's that, Stacey?
I think you should ask them to sponsor something.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. And then finally, just a beautiful photo spread of Blount Mansion today. Now, Debbie Woodiel couldn't be here tonight. She is a retired McClung Museum curator who is
She's
an expert.
the first educator that I ever hired at McClung. She is 30 years in the role, in an archaeology.
Incredibly gifted.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think she would want to read it, but there was a hard copy of the already typeset proof on the counter, and Debbie picked it up, and oh my goodness, we had to read everything. Because she got into the weeds in this chapter. She was changing every caption on every artifact, and she was right. That's the worst part. So I told her husband, I said, you don't know what you don't know until Debbie tells you. I said, I'm going to put that on her tombstone. But then, this was one of the hardest chapters to write, because you have to figure out exactly what to say about each thing and which artifacts are important enough to get their own picture and which should be left out. But it's a beautiful love letter to the mansion as the story is told today. And now that brings us to the film. So am I keeping anybody waiting? We got to hurry up. And I know you need to leave, Susan. So there have been 2 existing films. And I want to inflict both of them on you tonight. Simply so you will appreciate what we now have. The first one, actually, I won't say much about it. I think you'll pretty quickly tell it's a slideshow with music that they filmed. So we're going to look at a film of the film. So the first one is circa 1980, and I paid close attention and realized they were reading parts of the guidebook. So, and if you look at the pictures of the city, guidebook's 1977, I think, based on the skyscrapers and what isn't there, this is a 1981 film. And the next one comes courtesy of WBIR during the Tennessee Bicentennial in 1996. So here is the 1980s film. 1 minute, not too
much. This is the true story of a time, a people, and a place. The site was lovely in extreme, almost entirely sheltered by the primitive forest, its quiet disturbed only by the playful murmurings of several streams. The Blount Mansion has lived from the end of the 18th century straight on into the 20th century. These glass eyes, which first saw great trees, wagon roads, and log cabins, now look out to tall buildings and city traffic.
No Hyatt. No Hall.
But the sun still streams in the windows as it must have done when the house was new. Birds still sing in the garden, and there is an aura of quiet around the house that must be an 18th century quiet. The paneling that came over the mountains from North Carolina still graces the hall. And somehow, the spirit of hospitality that the Blounts brought to the house still remains to welcome each guest and keep the past alive.
So I kind of like that one, honestly.
Yeah.
It's relaxing. And I miss, it makes me nostalgic for a time in our culture when that kind of thing was mainstream. You know, I mean, that would not fly on TikTok. So here's the 1996 one, and I'm not throwing shade on this. It's got a lot of awesome reenactments, and it was a great gift from WBIR, and there's, I think, a state grant for it. But it's also very much of its time. So here we go.
It was the year of our Lord, 1790, and the winds of change were blowing all across this new country called the United States of America. A kind of strong gust must have blown down off these mountains just west of North Carolina. That's because a lot of folks on the other side were all stirred up about what to do with this land. The Indians that lived here thousands of years thought the land was theirs, but the white settlers, they thought differently. Soon, fine paneling and fancy woodwork came floating down the river. Governor Blount was building a home for his wife and 5 children. They were an aristocratic bunch, and his house would be too. It had glass in the windows and chimneys of handmade brick. For this frontier village of wagon roads and log houses now known as Knoxville, this was truly a mansion.
There you go. So when we made the new film, I had a couple of goals. We had just done a 3 or 4 part series of events in conjunction with the Baker Center at UT. It was called Common Ground. We brought people from opposite sides of the political spectrum together for a dinner and put them at the table across from their most opposite and made them talk about constitutional questions. And these were innocuous sounding issues like representation or, you know, how do you appropriate the seats in Congress? But they were really, you know, codes for things that we fight about today. And we made them watch short videos that were hosted by the CEO of the National Constitution Center. And there was narration from a female narrator that I found at Voices 123, which is a narrator service. And I loved her voice. So she narrates this. Dave's friend John Haas, who is a big-time filmmaker in Los Angeles, came 5 years ago, probably, and shot some interiors that had never been used. I brought my new drone out. We filmed with a drone. And Jim Lieb from Teleco Village, who's a retired video professional, color corrected it. So we have a really slick, awesome-looking film. This is 7 minutes, and then we'll be done and take any questions. So this is our new orientation film. You pull that down.
Tucked in between the tall glass buildings and concrete freeways of downtown Knoxville, Tennessee, stands a one-of-a-kind historic structure. Blount Mansion is the birthplace of Tennessee and the home of a signer of the United States Constitution. It was built in 1792 for William Blount. Blount was a prominent merchant and land speculator from eastern North Carolina who was active in state and national politics during and after the Revolutionary War. Blount signed the U.S. Constitution for his state in Philadelphia in 1787. 3 years later, President George Washington appointed him governor of the new Southwest Territory, which had been created from the former western half of North Carolina. Blount initially governed the territory from Rocky Mount, an existing residence 100 miles northeast of present-day Knoxville. The only other accommodations Blount might have considered on the frontier was a log stockade and compound at the confluence of the French Broad and Holston Rivers, belonging to Revolutionary War veteran James White. Blount visited White's Fort in the summer of 1791 to negotiate a peace treaty with the Cherokee. 40 elders and 1,200 warriors gathered on the banks of the river near White's centrally located fort to sign the Treaty of Holston. During the treaty negotiations, Blount decided that White's Fort was a better place for governing the Southwest Territory than Rocky Mount, He had White's son-in-law Charles McClung survey 64 half-acre lots near the fort. Blount held a lottery to parcel out the lots to new owners, and a new town was born. Blount named it Knoxville in honor of his boss, the Secretary of War, Henry Knox. Blount had his new home built on lot number 18. His wife Mary, who did not want to leave her comfortable life in North Carolina, made William promise to build her a proper house. The resulting hall and parlor-style home was a rarity in the region, featuring smoothly planed planks instead of rough-hewn logs, and boasting glass windows. These reportedly led the local Cherokee to refer to the structure as the house with many eyes. William, Mary, and 7 of their 9 children lived here in the house. But the house was more than just a family home. It was the territorial capital. Here, Governor Blount received visiting leaders, Native American elders, and others. Several of the 26 people the Blounts enslaved lived and toiled here as well. In the 1990s, archaeologists from the University of Tennessee discovered traces of the vanished slave quarters in the southwestern corner of the compound. Around the same time, archival research revealed details on the identities of the enslaved individuals. These include the cook, Sal, her husband, Cupid, as well as Jack, who journeyed over the mountains with Blount in 1790, and his mother, Hagar. Cupid was a builder responsible for constructing numerous structures in North Carolina, and possibly Blount Mansion itself. Today, you may still see the fingerprints of an enslaved brickmaker on one of the locally produced bricks in the back of the mansion. Now that the city and his house were finished, Blount turned his attention to creating a new state. In January of 1796, Blount called a constitutional convention in Knoxville. 45 delegates drafted a constitution for the new state, which they named Tennessee. The desk on which they signed that constitution now stands in Governor Blount's office at Blount Mansion. After weeks of negotiations, Congress finally gave its consent, and Tennessee became our nation's 16th state on June 1st, 1796. Blount had governed the federal Southwest Territory for more than 5 years, but now he would represent the new state of Tennessee in the United States Senate. By this point, William Blount was deeply in debt for hundreds of thousands of acres of land he and his partners had purchased in Middle and West Tennessee. Rumors swirled about the possibility that Spain, which controlled the Mississippi River, would shut down the important waterway to American commerce. This would have ruined Blount financially. Alarmed, the new senator unwisely joined a conspiracy to bring the British military back to North America to seize the Mississippi from Spain. A drunken courier shared a letter Blount wrote with his political enemies, and Blount's plot was uncovered. The House of Representatives issued articles of impeachment against Blount, the first in American history, and the Senate expelled him from office. In the end, the Senate dismissed the charges, but William Blount remains the only member of either House of Congress to face impeachment. Though his national political career was over, Blount was welcomed as a hero back in Tennessee, where settlers appreciated him looking out for their interests. He served as Speaker of the State Senate and was even buying more land when a fever claimed his life in the mansion on March 21st, 1800. His wife Mary died 2 short years later. They're buried side by side at the churchyard of First Presbyterian, just a few blocks north of Blount Mansion. Blount Mansion remained in family hands for years. William's half-brother Wiley, an early governor of Tennessee, owned it for a time. Knoxville mayors lived here, as did other prominent local citizens. In the first 2 decades of the 19th century, the upstairs loft was expanded into a full 2nd story, and wings were added to the east and west sides of the mansion. By the early 20th century, the house was a blighted tenement, cut up into apartments. When rumors circulated that a developer planned to level the mansion to create a parking lot, a prominent local woman rushed to save the house. Mary Boyce Temple was a civic leader in Knoxville and headed up the Bonnie Kate chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Temple wrote the first $100 check to secure an option on the property in 1925. She organized a successful effort to save the mansion and created the nonprofit Blount Mansion Association. Though Temple died before her dream became a reality, The mansion opened as a museum in 1926. The association struggled through the lean years of the Great Depression and World War II, but managed to work with some of the leading early figures in the historic preservation movement. Gradually, they acquired artifacts to match a 1797 inventory of William Blount's possessions, and restored the house as closely as possible to its condition during the Blount family's time here. In 1934, the association formed a lasting partnership with the Knoxville Garden Club, which commissioned landscape architects from colonial Williamsburg to design a beautiful colonial revival garden for the grounds. Today, this wonderful green space remains the only public garden in downtown Knoxville. More than 2 centuries after Blount created a city and a state, and a century since the creation of the museum, the Blount Mansion Association continues its mission of preserving this unique historic place and sharing its story with people of all ages. We hope you enjoy your visit to our museum and will consider joining the Blount Mansion Association as a member or a volunteer to help us share our story with more people from across the nation and around the world.
Yes.
I was just thinking, I lived in a house in Maine. It was part of Massachusetts back then when it was built 1685.
Yeah.
So it was older. Where is Mr. Blount from? Must have
North
been
Carolina.
So that's where he was born?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
And this
that
was part of North Carolina until he became the governor here.
Okay.
So,
It's good to see that the South came about that early. That's
yeah.
good.
This was the Wild West back then. Did you
Okay.
love the long credits? This is like every artifact and picture and where they all came from.
Yeah.
Are the bloopers after this?
No, there's no bloopers. Bloopers were the impeachment. So. And Susan Martin, who just left, is the incoming, she's president-elect of the Blount Mansion Board.
Oh.
She was a big part of I guess she is chairman of the Education Committee. Paul James from Knoxville History Project was chairman. He really kind of kicked us in the rear and said, time to do a book. So I don't think he ever thought the day would come. So
Nice to hear that.
Anyway, it means a lot to have you all here to celebrate this. And for me, this was a labor of love. And when people say, do you still work at Blount Mansion? I'll say, no, but I volunteer there. But after today, that's not true anymore since the book is done. So I'm just a supporter. Yeah, right. Does anybody else have any questions about it? What's that?
You're the one that decides how long you volunteer.
That's true, yeah.
I'm not kidding.
Well, sometimes it gets decided for you.
You're voluntold.
Exactly. I'm voluntold to leave the premises. Does anybody have any questions about Blount Mansion? And Dave can answer those too if I can. Oh, yes, Mike.
Do you think that Mr. Blount ever thought that his third guidebook to his mansion would have been written in Seoul, Korea by a guy?
I highly doubt it. That's a good point. I hope it just doesn't take another 25 or 50 years for the next one. And that's the thing. That's why I don't want to, cast too many dispersions on previous versions, because I don't know how mine's going to age. I don't know how Joseph, who probably outside of his tablet, is going to feel when he watches this film on a hologram.
If I had to hazard a guess, I'd say it'd be pretty well received.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a question? Comments, Nida and Mark?
You always
Okay,
take
well,
great
thanks for
time.
coming. I'm
Thank
sorry.
you for
Thank
doing
you.
this.
Yeah.
Each of these is signed. If you want to pick up one and go, you can. I'll be glad to personalize it for you if you don't mind waiting. I write pretty quickly, but it won't take me.
Cursive. Cursive.
I do. I write cursive. Don't get me started on cursive. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to Jennifer Lee for putting all this together tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.